The red dust swirled around Irene's boots as she swept the cracked concrete floor of what remained of her life. The barn stood like a broken promise. Half its roof collapsed inward, wooden beams jutting toward the sky like accusing fingers. She had called this place home for 3 months now, ever since the bank officials came with their papers and their practiced sympathy. "I'm sorry, Miss Irene," the manager had said, not meeting her eyes. "The drought lasted too long. The loans, they have to be repaid." She remembered watching them drive away, their black sedan leaving trails in the dust of land her grandfather had worked, land her father had died defending from erosion. 3 generations of Basiru family sweat had soaked into this soil, and now it belonged to strangers who would never know its secrets. Irene was 32 years old, built strong from years of manual labor, with hands that could read soil like others read books. Her mother had died when she was young, leaving her father to raise her alone. He taught her everything: how to listen to the land, how to feel the moisture content without instruments, how to understand what crops whispered through their roots. When he passed 5 years ago, she'd sworn to honor his legacy. Instead, she'd lost everything. The morning sun was already brutal, typical of the dry season in rural Kaduna State. Irene filled her bucket from the community well, careful not to waste a drop. Water was precious here, more valuable than the promises politicians made during election season. She washed her face, the water warm even in the early hours, and prepared for another day of odd jobs. She worked wherever she could now, helping other farmers, doing manual labor, taking on tasks that others found too difficult. Her reputation for strength and skill hadn't disappeared with her land. People still called her when they needed someone who could work harder than 2 men and solve problems that left agricultural school graduates scratching their heads. "Irene." A voice called from the road. It was Samuel, a neighbor who still owned his farm. "There's talk in town. Big news." She walked toward him, wiping her hands on her worn trousers. Samuel was 60, with gray stubble and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He'd tried to help her with the debts, but his own situation wasn't much better. "What news?" she asked. "Chief Henry Okafor, you know, the billionaire from Lagos? He bought the Riverside project. Paid 45 million naira for it." Irene knew the Riverside project well. It was supposed to be a massive agricultural development: greenhouses, irrigation systems, model farms. The previous owners had abandoned it after 2 years of failure. The soil refused to cooperate, crops died despite expensive fertilizers, and experts from 3 universities couldn't explain why. Local farmers had their theories, but no one with power ever listened to people who smelled like earth and honest work. 45 million. Irene whistled low. That land has defeated everyone who's touched it. "That's what makes it interesting," Samuel said, his eyes gleaming. "The chief's consultants tested everything. They say the problem is unfixable: wrong pH levels, depleted minerals, contaminated water table. People are calling it the biggest waste of money in state history. They're laughing at him in the newspapers." Irene felt something stir in her chest. She knew that land. She'd walked it many times with her father, back when it was still wild bush before the first developers came. Her father had warned them then, told them they were making mistakes, but they dismissed him as an uneducated peasant. "They tested wrong," she said quietly. "What?" "The consultants. They tested the wrong soil layer." She looked toward the horizon, where heat waves made the distant acacia trees shimmer like mirages. "That land has 2 faces. What you see on top tells lies. The truth is buried deeper, where the old riverbed used to run before the drought shifted it." Samuel stared at her. "You sound certain." "I am certain." She felt the old confidence rising, the knowledge her father had passed down, the understanding that came from generations of relationship with this specific earth. But who would listen to a woman living in a broken barn? "Maybe," Samuel said slowly, "someone desperate enough might listen. The chief is holding a meeting in town tomorrow. Open to anyone with ideas. The newspapers are there to watch him fail publicly." Irene looked back at her collapsed barn, at the small corner where she slept on a mat, at the plastic containers that caught rainwater when it bothered to fall. She had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. "What time is the meeting?" she asked. Samuel smiled. 10 o'clock. At the community hall. That night, Irene barely slept. She lay on her thin mat, staring at the stars visible through the gaps in the roof, and planned what she would say. She knew the land. She understood its secrets. But would a billionaire chief from Lagos, a man who probably wore shoes worth more than her entire former farm, listen to a woman who looked like she'd been defeated by the same earth she claimed to understand? As the moon crossed the sky, Irene made her decision. Tomorrow, she would speak. Tomorrow, she would stake everything on the knowledge her father had given her. Tomorrow, she would either prove herself or become another joke in a story already full of laughter at other people's expense. She closed her eyes and dreamed of fertile soil. Oh wow! Irene is about to confront a billionaire with nothing but her knowledge. Will he listen to a farmer who lost everything? Or dismiss her like everyone else? If you're rooting for Irene, hit that like button right now and subscribe to Folktales by Inaya. Comment below. Would you have the courage to speak up? What happens at that meeting is incredible. Share this story and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. The community hall buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Irene arrived early, positioning herself near the back where she could observe without drawing attention. The room smelled of old wood and fresh paint. Someone had tried to make the space presentable for the visiting billionaire. Plastic chairs arranged in uneven rows faced a small stage where a table and microphone waited. People continued filing in, local government officials in their best traditional attire, consultants carrying laptops and folders, journalists with cameras and recording devices. Everyone wore expectation like cologne, thick and obvious. They'd come to watch a rich man learn an expensive lesson about ignoring local wisdom. "Did you hear he's already spent 15 million just on soil amendments?" Someone whispered behind Irene. "My cousin works at the site. He says nothing grows there except weeds and disappointment." Irene remained still, watching. She wore her cleanest clothes, a simple blue dress her mother had sewn years ago, mended carefully at the seams. Her hands were scrubbed clean, but her boots still carried dust from the morning's walk. She didn't look like someone who belonged in a room full of educated consultants and government officials. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doors opened again, and Chief Henry Okafor entered. He wasn't what Irene expected. She'd imagined an older man, fat from comfortable living, wearing excessive gold and moving with the arrogance of unlimited wealth. Instead, Henry Okafor was perhaps 45, tall and lean, dressed in simple trousers and a locally woven shirt. His eyes swept the room with the alertness of someone who'd built his fortune through attention, not inheritance. Henry took the microphone without ceremony. "Good morning. I'm Henry Okafor, and I've made what everyone believes is a catastrophically stupid investment." His voice carried dry humor. "The newspapers have been very helpful in explaining how I've wasted 45 million naira on cursed land." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. "I didn't come here to make excuses," Henry continued. "I came to listen. My consultants, excellent people with impressive degrees, tell me the Riverside project is unsalvageable. But I've learned something in business. When experts agree on impossibility, they're usually missing something obvious." He paused. "So I'm opening this floor. Anyone who has genuine insight about that land, speak now. I'm listening." The room erupted in voices. Officials stood to promote their own agricultural programs. Consultants offered technical explanations full of scientific terms. Young men suggested bringing in foreign experts. Everyone talked, but nobody said anything Irene hadn't already heard before. She remained seated, listening, evaluating. These people spoke about the land like it was a problem in a textbook, something to be solved with formulas and imported solutions. None of them had touched that soil with their own hands. None of them had listened to what it was trying to say. "The pH levels are fundamentally incompatible with commercial agriculture," one consultant declared confidently. We've tested samples from 17 different locations. 17 surface samples, Irene said quietly. The consultant hadn't heard her, but someone near her had. The murmur spread, and conversations faltered as people turned to see who had spoken. Irene stood slowly. The movement drew more attention, and the room gradually fell silent as people noticed the woman in the mended dress with dust on her boots. You have something to add? Henry asked, his eyes finding her across the room. Your consultants tested the wrong soil layer, Irene said, her voice steady and clear. Every lesson her father taught her had prepared her for this moment. They sampled the top 40 centimeters. That's standard procedure, but that land isn't standard. And you are? Henry asked, not dismissively, but with genuine curiosity. Irene Basiru. I grew up on land adjacent to your project. My father taught me soil science before I could write my name. Someone in the crowd snickered. The woman who lost her farm to debts? She's giving advice. Irene felt the shame try to rise, but she pushed it down. Yes. I lost my land because drought destroyed 3 years of crops and banks don't accept knowledge as collateral. But my failure with money doesn't change what I understand about soil. Henry held up his hand, silencing the murmurs. Continue. The Riverside Project sits on land where a river ran 200 years ago, before climate patterns shifted it west. The old riverbed created layers, sediment, clay, then the original substrate. Your consultants tested the dead sediment layer that nothing can grow in. But if you dig down 80 to 100 centimeters, you'll find the old clay layer. Below that is soil that hasn't been touched by modern agriculture, still rich with the minerals and organic matter from centuries of river flooding. The room had gone completely quiet. One of the consultants, a young man with expensive glasses, laughed sharply. With all due respect, Miss Basiru, modern soil science uses calibrated equipment and laboratory analysis. We can't just trust someone's feeling about dirt. I don't work on feelings, Irene replied. I work on knowledge passed down through 3 generations of farmers who understood this land before your equipment was invented. My grandfather could predict weather patterns by watching termite behavior. My father could identify 16 different soil types by texture alone. I can tell you the moisture content, clay composition, and nutrient density of soil by working it in my hands. Can your equipment do that without electricity? Henry Okafor smiled. It wasn't a mocking smile, but one of genuine appreciation. That's quite a claim. It's not a claim. It's an offer. Irene stepped forward, moving through the crowd toward the stage. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. Take me to the Riverside Project right now. Give me 1 hour with the land. If I'm wrong, you've wasted 60 minutes. If I'm right, I can show you exactly where to dig and what you'll find. Henry stepped down from the stage. You're either remarkably confident or completely delusional. Either way, I want to know which. He looked directly at Irene. Let's go see if you can back up your words with proof. The journalists scrambled for their equipment. Officials protested about protocol. Consultants argued about proper procedure. Henry ignored them all, walking toward the door. Miss Basiru? He turned back to Irene. Are you coming? Irene followed him out into the sunlight, aware that every eye in the room was on her back. She'd just challenged an entire industry's worth of expertise with nothing but her inherited knowledge and her father's legacy. Now she had to prove she was right. No way. Irene just challenged all those experts in front of everyone. Is she about to make Chief Henry look like a genius or a fool? If this is giving you chills, smash that like and subscribe to Folktales by Inaya. Drop a comment, Team Irene or Team Consultants. What happened when they reached that land will blow your mind. Share this story with someone who loves a good underdog moment. Hit that notification bell. 3 vehicles formed a small convoy on the dusty road to the Riverside Project. Henry rode in the front car with his assistant. Irene sat in the second vehicle with two consultants who made no effort to hide their skepticism. The journalists followed in the third, their cameras ready to document either a triumph or humiliation. The 15-minute drive felt eternal. Irene stared out the window at familiar landscape, scattered acacia trees, dry grass, the occasional compound with corrugated iron roofs. This was her country, her home. She knew every rise and depression in this land. While the consultant saw data points and test results, she saw a living thing with moods and memories. They arrived at the project site. The Riverside project spread across 20 hectares, an ambitious vision of greenhouses, irrigation channels, and experimental crop fields. Currently it looked like ambition's graveyard. Cleared land stretched in neat sections, but nothing grew except struggling weeds. Expensive equipment sat idle. Workers lounged in whatever shade they could find, waiting for instructions that would make sense of the chaos. Henry climbed out of his vehicle, surveying the investment that everyone called a catastrophic mistake. His face revealed nothing, no disappointment, no anger, just patient assessment. "Well, Miss Basiru," he said as Irene joined him, "this is my 45 million naira mistake. Show me what I'm missing." Irene walked forward slowly, her boots crunching on the cleared ground. She could feel everyone watching, skeptical consultants, curious workers, eager journalists with cameras rolling. The morning sun was fierce now, baking the exposed earth. She knelt, running her hands across the surface. The soil felt wrong to her touch. Dense, lifeless, resistant. It was the sediment layer, exactly as she'd expected. Dead material deposited by the ancient river, good for nothing but holding space. "This is what your consultants tested," she said, letting the dirt fall through her fingers. "It feels dead because it is dead. Sediment compressed over centuries. No organic matter, no microorganism activity. Nothing will grow here no matter how much fertilizer you pour on it." "We used 15 tons of premium fertilizer," one consultant said defensively. "Triple the recommended amount." "Which made it worse," Irene replied, standing. "You fed dead soil and wondered why nothing came alive." She walked farther into the field, feeling the ground beneath her feet, reading subtle changes in texture and resistance. She was aware that to the observers, she looked like someone wandering aimlessly, but she was actually following the underground map her father had taught her to read. She stopped at a spot about 40 meters from the fence line. "Here. Dig here." "Why here specifically?" Henry asked. "Because right here, the old river made a bend. The sediment layer is thinnest at the inside of river bends. That's basic hydrology. You'll hit the clay layer faster, and below that, you'll find what you're actually looking for." Henry nodded to his workers. "Get the excavator." Within minutes, a small excavator rumbled to life. The operator looked at Irene questioningly. She pointed to the exact spot, and he positioned the machine. The first scoop removed the surface layer, the dead, gray-brown sediment everyone had been fighting. "Go deeper," Irene instructed. "Another meter." The excavator dug down. 40 centimeters. 60. 80. And then, "Stop," Irene called out. The operator killed the engine. Irene jumped into the shallow pit before anyone could stop her. The journalists surged forward, cameras capturing everything. She knelt in the excavated hole, examining the exposed layers. "Look." She pointed to distinct strata in the pit wall. "Top layer, sediment, 45 centimeters. Middle layer, clay, 30 centimeters. And this." She dug her hands into the bottom layer, pulling up dark, rich soil that crumbled beautifully in her fingers. "This is what your expensive consultants never found." She held up a handful of the deep soil. Even from several meters away, the difference was obvious. While the surface soil was lifeless and gray, this deeper earth was dark, almost black, with a texture that looked alive. Henry climbed into the pit beside her, taking a sample himself. He examined it, squeezed it, and his eyes widened slightly. "The moisture content." He whispered. This soil is still retaining water. And the texture, this is completely different from the surface. It's virgin soil, Irene explained. Protected by the clay layer above it, untouched by modern farming practices, still containing all the nutrients deposited by 2,000 years of river flooding. This is what you paid 45 million naira for, Chief Okafor. Not the dead surface, but this living earth underneath. She scooped up more of the deep soil, demonstrating its properties. Feel the texture, enough clay for water retention, enough sand for drainage, organic matter still present. Test the pH now, and you'll find it's nearly neutral. Check for minerals, and you'll find everything crops need. One of the skeptical consultants climbed down into the pit, taking his own sample. He worked it between his fingers, and Irene watched his expression change from doubt to astonishment. Sir, he said to Henry, she's right. This is pristine agricultural soil. Henry stood at the edge of the pit, looking down at them. How consistent is this across the property? Irene climbed out of the pit, brushing soil from her dress. She scanned the property with the practiced eye her father had trained. The old river wound through this entire area. The pattern won't be uniform, but I can map it. Where the river ran deep, the protective clay layer will be thicker, and the virgin soil below will be richer. Where it ran shallow, you'll have less depth but easier access. She walked across the property, stopping at several locations. At each stop, she knelt, felt the surface, and made mental notes. The crowd followed her like disciples following a prophet, watching her read invisible signs in apparently uniform ground. At the eastern boundary, she stopped. Dig here. Same depth. They did. Same result, sediment layer, clay layer, then rich, dark soil underneath. At the northern section. Same result. After the fourth demonstration, even the most skeptical consultant had fallen silent. The journalists were filming everything, their stories shifting from mockery to miracle. Henry walked over to where Irene stood, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Miss Basiru, you've just proven that my 45 million naira wasn't wasted. You've also proven that every expert I hired fundamentally misunderstood this land. He paused, studying her carefully. What's your solution? Irene had been thinking about this moment since the previous night. She knew what needed to be done, but she also knew the scale of what she was suggesting. You need to redesign the entire project, she said. Instead of treating the surface as your growing medium, you need to access the deep soil. That means excavating trenches, breaking through the sediment and clay layers, and bringing the virgin soil up or planting directly at depth. It's labor-intensive and technically challenging, but it's the only way to make this land produce. How labor-intensive? Henry asked. Very. You'll need a larger workforce, specialized equipment, and most importantly, you'll need someone who understands the underground topography to direct the work. Someone who can read the land and tell you where the old river ran deepest, where the soil is richest, where to invest your effort. Henry was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. Miss Basiru, I need someone to run this project. Someone who actually understands this land instead of just understanding theories about land. My consultants are excellent at what they do, but they missed something fundamental. You didn't miss it. You saw it immediately. Irene felt her breath catch. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you full control of the Riverside project. You design the approach, you direct the work, you make the decisions. My people will support you with resources and technical expertise, but you'll be in charge. Can you do it? She looked across the 20 hectares of land that everyone had written off as worthless. She saw what others couldn't. Not failure, but potential. Not dead earth, but sleeping soil waiting to be awakened. Yes, she said firmly. I can do it. Henry extended his hand, and Irene shook it. His grip was firm, respectful, the handshake of equals. Unbelievable. Irene just went from living in a collapsed barn to running a 45 million naira project. If this is making your heart race, Hit that like button and subscribe to Folktales by Inayah right now. Comment, what would you do first if you were Irene? How she transformed that worthless land is absolutely amazing. Share this video with everyone who needs inspiration. Turn on notifications. The first morning Irene arrived at the Riverside project as its director, the workers stared at her like she was a puzzle they couldn't solve. A woman in practical field clothes, carrying a worn notebook and her father's old measuring tools, commanding a project worth more than most of them would earn in their lifetimes. Henry had kept his word. He'd assigned her a team of 20 workers, given her access to all the equipment, and provided technical support. But he'd also been clear, you have 3 months to show real progress. After that, we'll need to decide if we continue or cut our losses. 3 months. 90 days to prove she could turn theory into harvest. Irene stood at the center of the property, her workers gathered around her in a semicircle. She recognized some faces from neighboring communities. Men who'd worked construction, women who'd farmed their own small plots, young people looking for opportunity. They were her people, familiar with hard work and skeptical of promises. I'm Irene Basiru, she began, keeping her voice steady and clear. Some of you might know me. I'm the farmer who lost her land to debt. I'm not educated in universities, and I don't have certificates on my wall. What I have is knowledge passed down through my family, knowledge about this specific land. She pointed to the test pits they'd dug the previous week. Chief Okafor hired experts who told him this land was worthless. They were wrong because they looked in the wrong place. We're not farming the surface. We're farming what's buried underneath. That means we work harder, dig deeper, and trust what the land tells us. An older worker named Philip spoke up. Miss Irene, I worked on this project before. We planted, we fertilized, everything died. What makes you think digging holes will change that? Because I've touched the real soil, Irene replied. What you planted in was dead sediment. What we're going to reach is living earth that's been protected for generations. But you're right to be skeptical. Watch and see. If I'm wrong, I'll be the first to admit it. She spread her notebook open, revealing hand-drawn maps of the property. I've walked every meter of this land. I've marked where the old river ran deepest. We're going to excavate strategic trenches following those patterns. Once we expose the virgin soil, we'll either bring it up or plant directly at depth, depending on the location. The first week was brutal. Excavating through sediment and clay layers was harder than anyone anticipated. The excavators could handle the volume, but the precision work required manual labor, people with shovels and experience, working in the sun, moving earth that resisted every effort. Irene worked alongside them, directing placement, checking depths, reading the layers as they exposed them. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her back ached. But she never asked anyone to do work she wouldn't do herself. On the 5th day, they hit the virgin soil in the first major trench. Word spread through the site like electricity. Workers gathered to see the dark, rich earth that looked nothing like the gray surface soil. Some reached down to touch it, amazed at the texture. This is real farming soil, Philip said, wonder in his voice. I haven't seen earth this good since I was a child, before the drought changed everything. They established their first experimental plot that week. Irene chose drought-resistant sorghum, local vegetable varieties that her father had favored, and several cash crops. The planting was careful, methodical. Every seed went into virgin soil that had been properly prepared. Now we wait, Irene told the gathered workers. And we trust. The second week brought their first crisis. A government agricultural official arrived, demanding to inspect their methods. He was accompanied by 2 of the original consultants who declared the project hopeless. This is highly irregular, the official declared, examining their trenches. You're not following any recognized agricultural protocols. These excavation depths are unprecedented. Because the situation is unprecedented, Irene countered. Standard protocols failed because this isn't standard land. One consultant shook his head. Miss Basiru, You're gambling with millions of naira based on folk knowledge and intuition. This isn't how modern agriculture works. Modern agriculture already failed here, Irene replied calmly. I'm using old knowledge because old knowledge understood this land before modern agriculture existed. The official looked ready to shut down the entire operation. But then Henry arrived, having been called by one of the workers. He listened to the official's concerns, examined the work being done, and then spoke with quiet authority. This woman has shown me something my expensive consultants missed. She's given me 3 months to prove her methods work. I suggest you give her the same courtesy. The official left, skeptical but unable to override Henry's determination. That night, Irene sat alone in the small office Henry had set up on site. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her. 30 people depended on this project for employment. Henry had invested millions on her word. If she failed, it wouldn't just be her reputation destroyed. It would be proof that traditional knowledge was worthless in the modern world. She thought of her father, remembered his patient teachings. The land never lies, Irene, he'd told her countless times. People lie. Numbers can be manipulated. But soil tells the truth to anyone willing to listen. By the 3rd week, the experimental plot showed its first signs. Green shoots emerged from the dark earth, tentative at first, then stronger each day. Workers would detour past the plot just to see the miracle of growth where experts had sworn nothing could grow. The sorghum reached 10 centimeters. Then 20. The vegetables followed, their leaves healthy and vibrant. Every day brought new proof that Irene's analysis had been correct. Henry visited at the end of the 1st month. He walked through the trenches, examined the growing crops, and spoke quietly with workers about their experience. Irene watched him, trying to read his expression. Finally, he approached her. The preliminary results are promising. The crop health exceeds all expectations. We're still early, Irene cautioned. We won't know real success until harvest. I'm not just impressed by the plants, Henry said. I'm impressed by the team. You've turned skeptical workers into believers. You've proven that expensive consultants missed something obvious. And you've done it all while living in. He paused delicately. A collapsed barn, Irene finished. Yes. Henry pulled an envelope from his pocket. Your 1st month's salary as project director. It includes a housing allowance. I expect you to find proper accommodation. I can't have my lead agricultural director living in a structure that barely qualifies as shelter. Irene took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was more money than she'd seen in 2 years. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Henry replied. Thank me when this project succeeds. Because if it succeeds, Irene, you won't just rebuild your reputation. You'll change how people think about land, knowledge, and who gets to be an expert. By the end of the 3rd month, the transformation was undeniable. The experimental crops were thriving. They'd excavated and prepared 6 major growing zones following Irene's mapping of the ancient river course. Worker productivity had increased as people began to believe in the project. The local newspapers that had mocked Henry's worthless purchase were now requesting interviews about the miracle transformation. Agricultural officials who'd threatened to shut them down were asking how they'd achieved such results. And Irene, the farmer who'd lost everything, was being called a visionary. No stopping her now. Irene turned worthless land into a thriving project in just 3 months. If this is giving you goosebumps, smash that like and subscribe to Folktales by Inaya. Comment below, what's more impressive, her knowledge or her courage? The ultimate recognition she receives will leave you speechless. Share this story and turn on notifications. You cannot miss the ending. The press conference was scheduled for a Saturday morning, 6 months after Irene had first challenged the consultants in the community hall. Henry had insisted on holding it at the Riverside project itself, so journalists could see the results firsthand. Irene woke early in her new home, a modest but comfortable house she'd rented on the outskirts of town. She stood in front of her small mirror, adjusting the traditional outfit she'd chosen for the occasion. The fabric was beautiful, locally woven in patterns that reminded her of her mother. She looked different now, still the same strong farmer, but no longer carrying defeat in her posture. The past 6 months had transformed more than just the land. They'd transformed her. The Riverside project now boasted 12 productive zones, each carefully excavated to access the virgin soil below. The first harvest had exceeded all projections. Sorghum yields 3 times the regional average, vegetables that commercial buyers fought over, cash crops that validated Henry's massive investment. Technical analysis confirmed that the deep soil methodology could be replicated in similar geological conditions across the region. But the real transformation was in perception. Irene had proven that traditional knowledge wasn't inferior to modern education. It was complementary. The consultants who'd initially dismissed her now sought her input. Agricultural officials consulted her about other problem sites. Young people from farming families approached her, wanting to learn how to read land the way their grandparents had. Samuel, her old neighbor, had visited the previous evening. "Your father would be so proud, Irene. You didn't just save your own reputation, you honored the knowledge he gave you." Now, as she drove to the project site in the vehicle Henry had assigned to her, Irene felt the weight of that legacy. This wasn't just about her success. It was about proving that people who smelled like honest work and earth had wisdom worth respecting. The site was transformed for the event. Workers had cleared a presentation area overlooking the most productive zone, where shoulder-high sorghum swayed in the morning breeze, a living testament to successful agriculture where experts had predicted only failure. Chairs were arranged for journalists, government officials, and investors. Cameras were positioned to capture everything. Henry arrived with his characteristic punctuality, dressed in formal traditional attire. Several of the consultants who'd initially worked on the project were with him. To their credit, several had approached Irene privately to apologize for their initial dismissiveness and to thank her for the education she provided. Philip and the other workers wore their best clothes, proud to be part of something that had succeeded beyond anyone's dreams. The project now employed 45 people full-time, with seasonal work for dozens more during planting and harvest. As guests arrived, Irene noticed the young consultant with expensive glasses, the one who'd mocked her folk knowledge. He approached her hesitantly. "Miss Irene, I wanted to say, I was wrong. Not just about the soil, but about knowledge itself. I thought my degree made me an expert, but you taught me that education without wisdom is just information." He extended his hand. "Thank you." Irene shook it. "Your degree is valuable. You have tools I don't have. The key is combining what we both know." The press conference began promptly at 10 o'clock. Henry took the microphone, standing before the assembled crowd with the thriving fields as his backdrop. "6 months ago, I stood in a community hall and was told I'd wasted 45 million naira on worthless land," he began. "The newspapers mocked me. Consultants declared the project unsalvageable. My friends questioned my judgment." He paused, looking directly at Irene. But one woman, a farmer who'd lost her own land, who was living in a collapsed barn, who had every reason to stay silent, stood up and told me my experts were wrong. The crowd murmured. Cameras focused on Irene. Irene Basiru didn't have impressive degrees or fancy equipment, Henry continued. What she had was knowledge passed down through generations. Knowledge that understood this land in ways that modern science had overlooked. She told me my consultants tested the wrong soil layer. She was right. He gestured to the fields behind him. This project was 6 months away from being abandoned. Now it's producing crops that exceed regional averages by 300%. We've employed 45 people full-time and dozens more seasonally. We've proven that land everyone called cursed is actually some of the most fertile in the state, if you know where to look. Henry's voice grew stronger. But this story isn't about my investment. It's about recognizing wisdom wherever it comes from. It's about listening to people who smell like earth and honest work instead of dismissing them because they don't have certificates on their walls. He turned fully toward Irene, and she felt every eye in the crowd follow his gaze. Miss Irene Basiru saved this project, Henry said clearly. But more than that, she saved something more valuable. My name, my reputation, my belief that impossible problems often have simple solutions if we're humble enough to listen to the right people. He paused, then delivered the line that would be quoted in newspapers across the country. This woman didn't steal my heart. She saved my name. The crowd erupted in applause. Journalists rushed forward with questions. Government officials who'd threatened to shut down the project now wanted photographs with Irene. The transformation was complete, from dismissed farmer to celebrated expert. But Irene remained grounded. When the microphone was offered to her, she took it with steady hands. I didn't save anything, she said quietly, and the crowd fell silent to hear her. The knowledge that saved this project was never mine alone. It belonged to my grandfather, my father, and countless farmers who understood this land before universities existed. They couldn't read or write, but they could read soil and weather and the language of growing things. She looked across the faces in the crowd, young people, old farmers, educated consultants, government officials. What happened here isn't a miracle. It's what happens when we stop dismissing traditional knowledge as primitive and start recognizing it as wisdom. Chief Henry didn't just give me a job. He gave respect to generations of farmers whose knowledge was ignored because it came without certificates. Her voice grew stronger. I lost my land to debt, and I thought I'd lost everything. But my father's teachings couldn't be repossessed by any bank. That knowledge lived in my hands, in my understanding, in my ability to listen to what the earth was saying. And when I was finally given a chance to speak, someone was humble enough to listen. She turned to Henry. You took a risk on someone everyone else had written off. You listened when you could have dismissed me. You gave me control when you could have kept it for yourself. That kind of leadership, the kind that recognizes wisdom wherever it comes from, that's what transformed this project. The applause was thunderous now. Philip stood with tears in his eyes. Samuel, who told her about the meeting 6 months ago, was grinning broadly. Even the consultant with expensive glasses was clapping enthusiastically. After the press conference, as journalists conducted interviews and officials took photographs with the thriving crops, Henry pulled Irene aside. I have a proposal, he said. This methodology, accessing deep soil layers in areas with similar geology, it could work across the region. I want to expand. 10 more sites, each one directed by someone trained in both traditional and modern methods. I want you to lead the entire program. Irene's breath caught. That's enormous. Yes. And it requires someone who understands both worlds, traditional knowledge and modern implementation. Someone who can train others to read land the way you do while also using contemporary tools and techniques. He smiled. I can't think of anyone more qualified. I'll need to hire people, Irene said, her mind already racing with possibilities. Young people from farming families who grew up with traditional knowledge but need employment. Old farmers like my father who were dismissed as uneducated but understand soil better than any laboratory. Hire whoever you need, Henry replied. Build the program you think will work. I'll provide the resources. That evening, Irene drove past her old farm, the land that had been seized for unpaid debts. The new owners had done nothing with it. It sat fallow and forgotten. She stopped the vehicle and stood at the fence, looking across fields her grandfather had cleared, her father had cultivated, and she had lost. She felt no bitterness now, only understanding. Losing this land had been devastating, but it had also freed her to see a bigger picture. If she'd kept her small farm, she would never have challenged the consultants. She would never have been given the chance to prove what her father's knowledge could accomplish. Sometimes, she realized, you have to lose everything to discover what you're truly capable of building. Her phone rang. It was Samuel. Irene, have you seen the news? You're on every channel. They're calling you the Soil Whisperer. The state governor wants to meet with you about agricultural reform. Universities are asking you to lecture. Irene smiled. It's overwhelming, Samuel. Your father would be proud beyond words. I hope so, she said softly. I hope wherever he is, he knows his teachings weren't lost. They were just waiting for the right moment to prove their worth. She drove to her new home as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: program development, site selection, team building. But tonight, she would rest in the knowledge that she'd honored her father's legacy and opened doors for others who carried traditional wisdom. The farmer who'd lost everything had rebuilt more than just her reputation. She'd rebuilt respect for generations of knowledge that had nearly been forgotten in the rush toward modernization. And in doing so, she'd proven that true expertise doesn't require certificates. It requires understanding, humility, and the courage to trust what you know even when the entire world doubts you. Incredible. From a collapsed barn to leading a regional agricultural program. If Irene's journey moved you, smash that like button and subscribe to Folktales by Inaya. Comment below. What's the most powerful lesson from Irene's story? Share this video with someone who needs to hear that losing everything isn't the end. It might be the beginning. Turn on notifications for more inspiring stories every week. Thank you for watching Folktales by Inaya.